The cavernous hall of the Galactic Council chambers stretched like an impossible geometric nightmare, its architecture a testament to millennia of interstellar diplomacy. Crystal-like surfaces refracted light in impossible patterns, creating an environment that was simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling to human perception. Miguel Reyes stood alone, a solitary figure of quiet determination amid a sea of alien representatives whose very existence challenged human understanding of biological possibility. To his left, a delegation of methane-breathing Volok's clustered together, their translucent exoskeletons shifting with each subtle movement. Their communicators buzzed with low-frequency vibrations that translated to barely concealed disdain. To his right, the silicon-based Kreenax delegation sat motionless, their crystalline bodies reflecting the chamber's ambient light in sharp, angular patterns that seemed to cut through the very fabric of diplomatic pretense. Miguel knew the statistics by heart. Humanity had been a recognized galactic species for barely 2 decades, a mere moment in the cosmic timeline of civilizations that had traversed the stars for hundreds of thousands of years. The human delegation consisted of just 7 representatives, while other species boasted contingents of 50 or more. Each human bore the weight of an entire species' first true interstellar diplomatic engagement. Xantok, the primary Zoraxian representative, rose to speak. His translucent tendrils undulated with a rhythm that suggested both superiority and barely contained contempt. The universal translator embedded in Miguel's neural link captured not just words, but the subtle nuances of alien communication, the micro-expressions, the biological tells that spoke volumes beyond mere language. The human representative will now present their case for expanded colonial rights, Xantok announced, his tone dripping with a patronizing undertone that suggested the outcome was already predetermined. Miguel stepped forward, his movements calculated and precise. Years of diplomatic training had prepared him for this moment, not just the technical aspects of interstellar negotiation, but the psychological warfare that defined truly high-stakes diplomatic encounters. He carried no physical documents, no traditional props. Instead, a holographic interface projected from a nearly invisible device on his wrist, ready to display information with surgical precision. The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of alien representatives from across the known galaxy turned their various sensory apparatuses toward the lone human. Some possessed eyes that were nothing like human eyes, compound structures that could perceive spectrums of light humans couldn't even imagine. Others had sensory organs that detected electromagnetic fields, chemical compositions, quantum fluctuations. Each was sizing up the human representative, searching for weakness. What they saw was unexpected. Miguel was neither aggressive nor submissive. He stood with a composure that suggested something deeper than confidence, a fundamental understanding that transcended the typical posturing of galactic diplomacy. His dark eyes scanned the chamber, making momentary contact with representatives from different species, creating a web of silent communication that spoke of something the aliens found deeply unsettling. Preparation, calculation, potential. The Kreenax representatives began to shift uncomfortably. Their quantum-linked communicators were picking up subtle information patterns that didn't conform to any known diplomatic protocol. The Volok's delegation's exoskeletons began to emit a low-frequency vibration that suggested genuine confusion. Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Council, Miguel began, his voice clear and measured. Humanity seeks not conquest, but collaboration. Our proposal for colonial expansion is based on a comprehensive analysis of resource distribution, ecological management, and interspecies cooperation. As he spoke, the holographic interface began to unfold, not with typical diplomatic charts or statistical graphs, but with living, dynamic representations of data. Ecosystem models that showed potential symbiotic relationships, economic projections that demonstrated how human involvement could create value for multiple species, technological innovation frameworks that suggested pathways of mutual advancement. It was not a presentation. It was an invitation to reimagine possibility. Xantok's tendrils began to twitch, a sign of genuine agitation among his species. The human was not playing by any established rules. He was rewriting them in real time with a calm that suggested this was nothing more than a casual exercise. The first stage of humanity's true introduction to the galactic community was about to begin. The diplomatic reception hall pulsed with an undercurrent of tension that even the most sophisticated alien translation algorithms struggled to interpret. Lydia Nakamura stood near the periphery of the gathering, her seemingly casual posture masking a mind that was constantly analyzing, calculating, processing. Holographic displays flickered around the room, showcasing humanity's recent technological achievements. Each projection told a story of rapid innovation, quantum computing breakthroughs, adaptive ecosystem restoration technologies, neural interface developments that blurred the lines between biological and artificial intelligence. To the alien representatives, these should have been impressive displays. Instead, they were met with a chorus of condescending murmurs and dismissive gestures. Near the central platform, Xantok of the Zoraxian delegation held court with a group of senior representatives from various star systems. His translucent tendrils moved in intricate patterns that suggested both contempt and amusement. Observe their primitive attempts at innovation. He communicated through a series of complex bioelectromagnetic signals. Humans are like children playing with tools they cannot possibly understand. The translation systems picked up his communication, broadcasting it to the human delegation. Most would have seen this as a grave insult, but not these humans. Lydia caught Miguel's eye across the room. A subtle movement of her right hand, 3 quick taps against her datapad, communicated volumes. It was a coded message, part of a communication protocol developed specifically for this moment. Years of preparation had led to this point, a moment that would define humanity's place in the galactic community. The reception hall itself was a marvel of architecture. Designed to accommodate hundreds of different physiological requirements, it featured adaptive environmental zones that could simultaneously support methane-breathing entities, silicon-based life forms, and carbon-based organisms like humans. Gravity wells shifted subtly, atmospheric compositions changed in microscopic gradients, and holographic interfaces translated communication in real time. But today, the hall would become something else entirely. A junior Volox diplomat approached Lydia, his segmented exoskeleton shifting with curiosity. "Your species continues to perplex us," he communicated, his bioluminescent patches flickering with complex emotional undertones. Such rapid technological progression, yet so little coherent galactic strategy. Lydia smiled. It was not a warm smile, nor a hostile one. It was the smile of someone who knew something profound that others did not yet understand. "Progression is not always about speed," she responded, her voice calm and measured. "Sometimes it's about potential." The Volox diplomat's communication patches began to pulse erratically, a sign of genuine confusion among his species. Humans consistently defied the standard synopsychological models that had been developed over millennia of interstellar diplomacy. Behind the scenes, a network of quantum-encrypted communication channels hummed with activity, while the diplomatic reception continued its surface-level dance of subtle insults and passive-aggressive posturing. Something far more significant was taking shape. Teams of human strategists, spread across multiple star systems, were executing a plan decades in the making. Economic analysts mapped out intricate vulnerability points in alien trade networks. Cybersecurity experts developed adaptive algorithms that could penetrate the most sophisticated defensive systems. Xenolinguists decoded communication patterns that went far beyond simple language translation. Every dismissive gesture, every condescending comment from the alien representatives was being meticulously recorded, analyzed, processed, not as a source of anger, but as strategic intelligence. Miguel moved through the crowd with calculated precision. To the casual observer, He appeared to be engaged in standard diplomatic small talk. In reality, he was gathering final pieces of a complex strategic puzzle. Each conversation, each interaction was another data point in a rapidly developing plan. Zantok continued his performance, unaware that every moment was being transformed from a potential humiliation into a strategic opportunity. The Zaraxian believed he was delivering a masterful diplomatic put-down. He had no idea he was providing exactly the information humanity needed. The breaking point was not a moment of explosive confrontation. It was this, a cold, calculated preparation that would redefine the very concept of interstellar diplomacy. Lydia's fingers moved almost imperceptibly across her datapad. A message was sent. The first phase was complete. The research facility appeared unremarkable from the outside, a sleek, minimalist structure nestled in the mountains of New Mexico. Exterior cameras and environmental sensors suggested nothing more than a standard corporate research center. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lay humanity's most sophisticated think tank, a nexus of interdisciplinary genius that would redefine the meaning of strategic preparation. Alejandro Gomes stood before a holographic display that seemed to breathe with living information. Quantum processors hummed with a quiet intensity that matched the concentration of the team around him. Each team member represented a different discipline, their collective intelligence far more powerful than any individual genius. Dr. Isabela Rodriguez, a quantum systems expert, manipulated complex data streams with a series of precise hand movements. Her background in theoretical physics and xenoeconomics made her uniquely suited to decode the intricate economic networks of alien civilizations. Next to her, Wei Zhang, a specialist in adaptive cybernetic systems, was developing algorithms that could predict and manipulate communication networks with unprecedented accuracy. "We're not just collecting data," Alejandro explained to a junior researcher who watched the proceedings with barely contained excitement. "We're creating a comprehensive model of galactic interdependencies that goes beyond traditional intelligence gathering." The facility was a marvel of human innovation. Adaptive learning systems continuously processed information from multiple sources. Diplomatic communications, economic transactions, technological patent registries, even subtle cultural exchanges captured through complex communication analysis networks. Machine learning algorithms worked in concert with human intuition, creating predictive models that defied traditional computational approaches. A massive holographic globe slowly rotated in the center of the main research chamber. Each point of light represented a different civilization, connected by intricate web-like lines that pulsed with real-time data. Economic flows, technological exchanges, resource distribution, everything was mapped with a complexity that would make traditional intelligence agencies look like children playing with primitive puzzles. Dr. Fatima Khalid, a renowned expert in xenopsychology, approached the holographic display. Her fingers traced a series of cultural interaction points, revealing subtle pressure systems that existed between different alien civilizations. "Look here," she said, highlighting a series of interconnected diplomatic and economic relationships. The Zaraxian collective believes their influence is absolute, but every system has its breaking points. The team worked with a synchronicity that defied traditional collaborative models. No single person was driving the project. It was a collective intelligence that functioned more like a living organism than a traditional research team. Communication happened through a combination of verbal exchanges, neural-linked data sharing, and intuitive understanding that transcended verbal language. Alejandro watched as multiple simulation scenarios played out simultaneously. Each model explored a different potential response to the diplomatic challenges humanity faced. They weren't preparing for war, they were preparing for a fundamental restructuring of interstellar relationships. "Our goal is not destruction," he explained to the team during their daily briefing. "We're going to demonstrate that human potential is not about military might or technological superiority. We're going to show that true power lies in adaptability, in the capacity to understand and reshape complex systems." The quantum computers began to hum with increased intensity. Predictive models started to converge, revealing patterns that no single alien civilization had ever anticipated. Economic vulnerabilities, technological dependencies, cultural blind spots, everything was being mapped with surgical precision. Outside the facility, the world continued its normal rhythm. Stock markets fluctuated, social media buzzed with trivial conversations, and most of humanity remained blissfully unaware of the strategic masterpiece being constructed within these walls. But this was more than just a research project. It was humanity's response to years of diplomatic marginalization. Each algorithm, each predictive model was a statement, a declaration that being underestimated was the most dangerous mistake any civilization could make. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her console, a slight smile playing on her lips. "We're ready," she said simply. Alejandra nodded. The quiet storm was about to become a transformative hurricane. The first tremors began in the least expected places. Financial centers across multiple star systems started to experience inexplicable fluctuations, tiny, almost imperceptible changes that would have gone unnoticed by anyone but the most meticulous observers. Alina Rodriguez sat in a climate-controlled monitoring room, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that displayed global economic networks. Each movement was precise, calculated, a symphony of economic warfare that would make traditional military strategies look like crude child's play. The attack was not about destruction, it was about deconstruction. Cryptocurrency exchanges began to experience micro-perturbations. Trading algorithms developed by human analysts started to introduce infinitesimal variations into market dynamics. These were not crude hacks or direct attacks, but sophisticated manipulations that worked their way through the most advanced economic protection systems. On the Kreenax homeworld, the first signs of trouble emerged in their primary quantum-linked trading hub. A series of seemingly random transactions began to create cascading effects that defied traditional economic modeling. The silicon-based traders found their predictive algorithms becoming increasingly unstable, unable to account for the new variables being introduced. "Something is disrupting our economic flow," a senior Kreenax economic analyst communicated through their complex bioelectromagnetic language. "But we cannot identify the source." That was precisely the point. Alina watched as the first major economic networks began to destabilize. It wasn't a collapse, it was a carefully orchestrated deconstruction. Trade routes that had existed for thousands of years suddenly found themselves facing unprecedented complexity. Resource allocation systems became increasingly unpredictable. The Volok's Diplomatic Economic Council was the first to raise a formal alarm. Their communication networks lit up with increasingly desperate exchanges. Quantum encrypted channels began to show signs of stress, with information flows becoming increasingly erratic. What made the economic attacks so devastating was its fundamental approach. This was not about destroying economic systems, but about revealing their inherent fragilities. Each manipulation exposed underlying weaknesses that had been hidden for millennia. In the Human Research Facility, Alejandro Gomes watched the economic models unfold with a clinical detachment. "We're not breaking their systems," he explained to a junior researcher. "We're demonstrating how fundamentally interconnected and vulnerable they are." The economic attack spread like a sophisticated virus. It didn't destroy, it transformed. Trading algorithms became unreliable. Resource allocation systems found themselves facing unprecedented challenges. Entire economic networks that had seemed immutable suddenly found themselves facing fundamental restructuring. On the Zoraxian homeworld, financial centers began to experience unprecedented volatility. Trading platforms that had existed for centuries suddenly found themselves unable to predict even basic market movements. The carefully constructed economic superiority of millennia-old civilizations began to crumble. Alina's fingers continued their precise dance across the interfaces. Each movement was a calculated strike, introducing complexity where there had been assumed stability. The economic models they had developed were not just predictive, they were adaptive, capable of responding to changes in real time. It's not about winning, Elena muttered to herself, it's about demonstrating potential. The first truly global realization began to dawn. This was not an attack in any traditional sense. This was a fundamental restructuring of economic understanding. Alien civilizations that had considered themselves economically invincible now found themselves facing a level of complexity they could not comprehend. Communication channels across multiple star systems began to light up with increasing panic. Emergency economic councils were convened. Diplomatic channels became increasingly frantic. But the true brilliance of the strategy was its subtlety. No single economic system had been completely destroyed. Instead, they had been fundamentally challenged, their underlying assumptions exposed and transformed. As the first day of the economic eclipse came to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had just demonstrated a level of economic warfare that defied every previous understanding of interstellar economic interactions. The quiet storm had become a hurricane. The first signs of the cyber invasion were so subtle that they might have been mistaken for standard system maintenance. Marco Liu stood at the central command station, his eyes reflecting multiple holographic displays that showed the intricate web of alien communication networks. Quantum encrypted channels began to shimmer with unexpected patterns. Navigation systems for interstellar spacecraft started to experience microfluctuations that seemed random, but were anything but accidental. Each digital intervention was a precision instrument, carefully crafted to expose the fundamental vulnerabilities of alien technological infrastructure. The human cybersecurity team had spent decades studying alien communication protocols. This was not about breaking systems. It was about understanding them so deeply that manipulation became an art form. Marco watched as adaptive algorithms began to weave through complex network architectures, introducing complexity that defied traditional defensive mechanisms. On the Kreenax primary communication hub, the first true signs of intrusion began to manifest. Their silicon-based communication networks, once considered impenetrable, started to experience inexplicable routing anomalies. Navigation systems for their most advanced spacecraft began to receive conflicting coordinate data, creating a web of confusion that spread like a sophisticated digital virus. "We're detecting multiple system irregularities," a Kreenax senior systems analyst communicated through their bioelectromagnetic language. But the source remains unidentifiable. That was precisely the intention. Each digital intervention was a carefully constructed puzzle. The human team had developed adaptive algorithms that could reshape themselves in real time, moving through alien communication networks like digital phantoms. They weren't destroying systems, they were revealing their fundamental weaknesses. Marco's team had spent years developing a new approach to cybersecurity. Traditional methods of digital warfare focused on destruction or direct infiltration. Their strategy was far more nuanced, a complete reimagining of how technological systems could be manipulated. Planetary defense grids began to experience subtle shifts. Communication channels started to introduce microscopic delays that were almost imperceptible but fundamentally destabilizing. Alien spacecraft found their navigation systems providing increasingly unreliable data, creating a sense of technological uncertainty that was far more powerful than any direct attack. The Volux communication network was the next to experience the sophisticated digital intervention. Their quantum-linked communication systems, which had been considered the most advanced in the known galaxy, began to show signs of fundamental instability. Information flows became increasingly complex, with routing algorithms struggling to maintain coherence. "This is not a traditional cyber attack," Marco explained to a junior team member. "We're demonstrating the fundamental fragility of technological systems that believe themselves to be invincible." Interstellar communication networks that had existed for millennia suddenly found themselves facing unprecedented challenges. Each digital intervention was designed to introduce complexity, to reveal the underlying assumptions that had made these systems seem unbreakable. On the Zaraxian primary communication hub, entire communication sectors began to experience inexplicable routing issues. Spacecraft navigation systems started to provide conflicting coordinate data. Defense grid communication became increasingly unreliable, with information flows becoming more of a suggestion than a definitive command. The true brilliance of the approach was its subtlety. These were not destructive attacks. They were sophisticated demonstrations of potential, a way of showing that human technological understanding could reshape the very concept of digital communication. Marco watched as the holographic displays began to show the cascading effects of their digital intervention. Entire communication networks were being transformed, their fundamental assumptions challenged in ways that defy traditional understanding of cybersecurity. As the first day of the digital invasion came to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had just demonstrated a level of technological manipulation that went far beyond traditional concepts of cyber warfare. The digital phantoms had revealed themselves, and the galaxy would never be the same. Sofia Valdez stood before a massive holographic display that pulsed with living information. Each stream of data represented more than just communication. It was a carefully constructed weapon of psychological transformation. The art of mimetic engineering had evolved far beyond simple information manipulation. This was about reshaping fundamental perceptions. The communication strategy was multilayered, targeting the deepest cultural assumptions of alien civilizations. Decades of xenocultural research had provided an unprecedented understanding of how different species processed information, maintained cultural narratives, and defended their collective psychological constructs. The first wave of targeted communications began to spread across interstellar communication networks. These were not crude propaganda pieces, but intricate narrative constructs designed to penetrate the most sophisticated psychological defenses. Each transmission was a precisely crafted piece of information that would slowly unravel the most deeply held beliefs of alien civilizations. For the Kreenax, a species that prided itself on absolute technological superiority, the narrative began with subtle historical recontextualizations. Archived records were reframed, showing moments of technological vulnerability that had been carefully hidden from collective memory. Each piece of information was backed by meticulously researched data, creating a narrative that challenged their fundamental understanding of their own historical progress. The Volox communication networks found themselves bombarded with nuanced psychological interventions. Cultural myths that had sustained their civilization for millennia began to show microscopic fissures. Historical achievements were recontextualized, showing the complex interdependencies and hidden vulnerabilities that had been systematically ignored. "We're not destroying their narratives," Sofia explained to her team of synopsychological experts. "We're providing a mirror that reflects the complexity they've been avoiding." Each transmission was a carefully constructed piece of a larger psychological puzzle. The human team had developed adaptive communication algorithms that could reshape themselves in real time, responding to the specific psychological defensive mechanisms of different alien species. On the Zaraxian primary communication hub, the first signs of psychological destabilization began to emerge. Cultural narratives that had seemed immutable started to show unexpected complexity. Historical achievements were recontextualized, revealing layers of vulnerability that had been carefully hidden from collective consciousness. The psychological intervention was multidimensional. It wasn't about creating conflict or destroying cultural identity. It was about introducing a level of nuanced understanding that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological, cultural, and historical superiority. Marco Liu's cybersecurity team worked in concert with Sofia's mimetic engineering group. Digital communication channels became conduits for a sophisticated psychological intervention that defied traditional understanding of information warfare. Alien civilizations that had considered themselves psychologically impenetrable began to experience fundamental shifts in collective understanding. Cultural myths that had sustained entire species for millennia started to show unexpected complexity. The Kreenax communication networks began to experience unprecedented psychological turbulence. Historical narratives that had seemed absolute began to show microscopic fissures. Each piece of information was a precision instrument designed to introduce complexity where there had been assumed simplicity. This is not about destruction, SciFi reminded her team. This is about demonstration. We're showing the potential for a more nuanced understanding of collective consciousness. As the first day of the narrative intervention came to a close, the true brilliance of the strategy became apparent. Humanity had developed a form of psychological warfare that went far beyond traditional concepts of information manipulation. The narrative weapons had been deployed, and the galaxy found itself facing a level of psychological complexity it had never anticipated. Each transmission was a whisper that would become a hurricane. Cultural assumptions that had seemed immutable now found themselves facing a fundamental reimagining of potential. The quiet storm had become a transformative force that would reshape entire civilizations. The Galactic Council chamber felt different this time. The air itself seemed charged with an unprecedented tension, a collective anticipation that defied traditional diplomatic protocols. Miguel Reyes stood at the center of the gathering, no longer a supplicant, but an architect of a new interstellar paradigm. Holographic displays flickered with complex data streams that told a story far more profound than any single species could comprehend. Economic networks lay exposed, technological vulnerabilities laid bare, cultural narratives stripped of their long-held illusions. The assembled representatives from dozens of alien civilizations found themselves confronting a reality they had never anticipated. Zantok of the Zoraxian delegation, once the most vocally dismissive of humanity, now sat motionless. His translucent tendrils, which had once moved with such confident contempt, now hung limply, betraying a fundamental shift in understanding. Distinguished representatives, Miguel began, his voice calm and measured. We stand before you not as conquerors, but as a demonstration of potential. The presentation was a masterpiece of strategic communication. Each data point was a carefully constructed narrative that revealed the complex interdependencies of galactic civilization. Economic models showed how humanity's interventions had not destroyed systems, but exposed their fundamental vulnerabilities. Technological analyses demonstrated the adaptive capabilities that had systematically penetrated supposedly impenetrable networks. Dr. Fatima Khalid stepped forward, her presentation focusing on the psychological dimensions of their intervention. Holographic displays revealed how deeply ingrained cultural narratives had been systematically recontextualized. It was not an attack, but a profound invitation to reconsider fundamental assumptions about technological and cultural superiority. The Kreenax representatives found themselves particularly challenged. Their silicon-based communication networks, once considered the pinnacle of technological achievement, now stood as a testament to their own limitations. Economic models showed how their supposedly impervious trade systems had been manipulated with surgical precision. We did not seek to destroy, Miguel continued, we sought to demonstrate. Behind him, a series of holographic displays began to show the true extent of their intervention. Economic networks that had seemed immutable now revealed their fundamental fragilities. Technological systems that had been considered invincible now stood as monuments to the dangers of assumed superiority. The Volox delegation's communication patches began to pulse with a complexity that suggested genuine cognitive dissonance. Their entire understanding of interstellar dynamics was being fundamentally challenged. Alina Rodriguez presented the economic analysis. Her presentation was not a victory lap, but a clinical demonstration of systemic vulnerability. Each economic network was shown to be far more fragile than anyone had previously understood. The interventions had not destroyed these systems, but had revealed their fundamental interconnectedness. Marco Liu followed with the technological analysis. The cybersecurity interventions were shown to be less about direct attack and more about demonstrating the potential for adaptive intelligence. Entire communication networks have been systematically exposed, not through destruction, but through a profound understanding of their underlying architectures. Sofia Valdez's presentation on psychological interventions was perhaps the most challenging. She demonstrated how deeply held cultural narratives could be recontextualized, not through force, but through a nuanced understanding of collective consciousness. The Galactic Council chamber had transformed. What had once been a place of diplomatic posturing had become a forum for a fundamental reimagining of interstellar potential. "We are not here to claim superiority," Miguel concluded. "We are here to demonstrate that true potential lies not in technological might, but in the capacity to understand, adapt, and reimagine." As the presentation concluded, the assembled representatives found themselves facing a profound truth. Humanity had not conquered through traditional means. They had transformed the very understanding of what conquest could mean. The diplomatic reckoning was complete. The galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of humanity's strategic intervention rippled across the galaxy like a fundamental reconfiguration of cosmic understanding. What had begun as a diplomatic challenge had transformed into a comprehensive reimagining of interstellar relationships. On countless worlds, in communication hubs and diplomatic chambers, the story spread. Not a tale of conquest, but a demonstration of potential that defied every previous understanding of technological, economic, and cultural interaction. Dr. Lydia Nakamura stood before a holographic display that mapped the cascading consequences of humanity's intervention. Each connection point represented not just a diplomatic or economic network, but a fundamental shift in galactic consciousness. The human strategy had accomplished something far more profound than any military conquest could have achieved. The Kreenak civilization found itself undergoing the most dramatic transformation. Their silicon-based communication networks, once considered the pinnacle of technological achievement, now became laboratories of adaptive intelligence. Research centers that had once prided themselves on technological superiority now studied human methodologies with a mixture of terror and profound respect. Economic systems across multiple star systems began to evolve. The interventions had revealed fundamental vulnerabilities, but more importantly, they had demonstrated the potential for more adaptive, more interconnected economic models. Trade networks that had existed for millennia were being completely reimagined. "We are witnessing the birth of a new galactic paradigm," Alina Rodriguez explained during a comprehensive analysis conference. Her presentation demonstrated how the human intervention was not about destruction, but about revealing potential. The Volok's diplomatic corps found themselves in an unprecedented position. Their traditional communication strategies, which had relied on centuries of established protocols, now seemed hopelessly outdated. Younger members of their civilization began to advocate for completely new approaches to interstellar communication and cooperation. Marco Liu's cybersecurity research became a focal point of study across multiple civilizations. The adaptive algorithms developed by the human team were now being carefully analyzed, not as weapons, but as a new approach to understanding technological interaction. Sofia Valdez's work on memetic engineering transformed entire fields of synapsychological research. Universities and research centers across the galaxy began developing new disciplines that explored the complex interactions between cultural narratives and collective consciousness. The Zoraxian Collective, once the most dismissive of human potential, now found themselves at the forefront of a new approach to interstellar diplomacy. Their research centers began comprehensive studies of human strategic methodologies, recognizing that true power lay not in technological might, but in adaptive intelligence. Miguel Reyes found himself invited to diplomatic conferences across multiple star systems, but these were not the same diplomatic gatherings of the past. These were forums of genuine exploration, of understanding the potential for truly collaborative interstellar relationships. What humanity had accomplished went far beyond a simple demonstration of technological or strategic capability. They had introduced a fundamental reimagining of what was possible in interstellar interaction. Research centers began developing new interdisciplinary approaches that combined elements of economic theory, cybersecurity, cultural studies, and adaptive intelligence. The human intervention had created an entirely new field of galactic studies that focused on potential rather than limitation. The most profound transformation occurred in how different civilizations began to understand themselves. The interventions had not been about proving human superiority, but about demonstrating the potential for a more nuanced, more adaptive approach to interstellar relationships. Communication networks that had once been rigid and hierarchical began to develop more flexible, more adaptive models. Economic systems started to recognize the value of complexity and interconnectedness. Cultural narratives became more open to reinterpretation and growth. As the first solar cycle after the intervention came to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through traditional means. They had transformed it through a profound demonstration of adaptive potential. The quiet storm had become a fundamental reimagining of galactic possibility. Across countless worlds, in countless languages, a new story began to be told. The story of the species that did not conquer, but transformed. The story of humanity.